Ayaga kucha sakta cooking, unanga a cooking. Hello, my name is Lauren Peters. I'm Unanga from the Aleutian and Pribilof Islands of Alaska. I'm a PhD student at UC Davis in Native American Studies with a designated emphasis in human rights, and I focus on human rights of the dead, looking for our children and families that were stolen by the US government and died while in their institutions. Today we're going to talk about a brief overview of the Aleutian Island and Pribilof Island history and from pre-contact through World War II. So a little bit about location and vocabulary. We are Unanga. That's the islands that are in the purple up to about the Q in Alutiiq along the chain there, and the two Pribilof Islands that are above the word Unanga. The Russians, when they came, called all the people from the tip of the chain all the way down to where about the green part starts to the right, all of us Aleut. And so that's confusing when we're looking at our history because it's always written Aleut, and people use the word Aleut to describe themselves today, even though they're not from the Aleutian Islands particularly. So the Unanga are also not traditionally part of the Pribilof Islands, which is the two islands, St. Paul and St. George, above the word Unanga, or the Commander Islands or the Near Islands that are all the way to the left, those two purple dots there. And when the US bought Alaska from the Russians in 1867, those two islands on the far left are on the Russian side. And so there are still Unanga on those islands that speak Unanga and Russian that are very difficult for us to reach from our families. This is a map that I'm showing because it highlights some of the places I'm going to be talking about today. And to the far left are the Kuril Islands above, in between Japan and the Kamchatka Peninsula. At the Commander Islands, you see the Komandorsky Islands that are still part of Russia. Attu, Dutch Harbor, which is on Alaska, and the Pribilof Islands you can see up in the north in the Bering Sea. I show this map because our family were taken as far away from the Aleutian Islands as to the Kuril Islands to work for the Russians and all the way down to California. So in 1741, we had first contact with the Russians. What happened was Vitus Bering took two ships and left the Kamchatka Peninsula looking for America. And he basically twirled around in the middle of the North Pacific Ocean until he bumped into Alaska, and then turned around and went right back home. And on his way home, he was getting water at one of the islands when some of the people from the islands, from the Aleutians, came out to greet them. They took a boat into to go ashore with the Aleutian Islanders, and they had an exchange of gifts. The Russians gave them some tobacco to smoke, which confused them, so they didn't take that at all. He gave them a drink of alcohol, which he spit out and started to get really angry. They were trying to encourage them to come ashore, so they're holding on to the boat. And the people on the boat, the Russians on the boat, got concerned that the tide was going in and the water was too rough, and they wanted to leave. So the people on the big ship fired over their heads, startling the Aleutian Islanders enough that they let go of the boat. So in this very brief exchange of cultures, the Aleutian Islanders were exposed to alcohol, tobacco, gun violence, and disease. And eventually, when the Russians came back, they introduced white flour and sugar. And this continues to affect the health of us today. Diabetes is a problem in the Aleutian Islands. So what were the Russians after? They were after this little fellow, Chingatu. He is a otter, a sea otter. He has the densest fur in the world. The fur was very popular in China. That was the main market for the Russians, and each pelt was worth a year's wages. One problem with the Russians is they are very bad at hunting chingatu because they would shoot them with their musket, and a sea mammal, when he's shot, sinks. But the Russians did notice that the Onunga hunters were very good at hunting chingatu and every other sea mammal. And as you can see, they are equipped. They had the technology. They had a double-bowed kayak. They had rain gear that they made from seal intestine, and they had their visors were geared to keep the wind and the rain off their faces they were hunting, and also to hide their faces so that the chingatu wouldn't tell that they were men out hunting. One thing about the chingatu is that we normally didn't hunt them because they are our relatives, and they are our reincarnated relatives, and also the meat is not good to eat. So we didn't hunt them, and so the Russians would come and they'd say, "We want you to hunt these chingatu," and we said, "No, we can't hunt them because they're our relatives, and we can't eat the meat." And he said, "Okay, that's fine. We'll come and bring your families, and we'll have a discussion. We'll have a meal together." And so the families came, and the Russians said again to the men, "I want you to hunt the chingatu," and they said, "No, I'm sorry, we can't do that." And so he shot the wife. And then he asked again, "Will you hunt the chingatu?" And that now we are an enslaved group of people, and we were forced to hunt the chingatu almost to extinction. And with the extinction of the chingatu came the near extinction of the Onunga people. As the Russians came up the chain, they would kill the chingatu. They would take the men away from their families, leaving the women to be abused. They would steal the children and take them back to Russia to become educated in the Russian language and also to be converted to Russian Orthodoxy. Why didn't we fight back? We did. In 1762, we finally were completely fed up. It was a full generation later of children being raised under these abuses by the Russians, and so they had a reprisal. The people on Alaska and Umnek Island killed all the Russians in the bays that were there hunting, but 2 men got away and went back to Russia and said what had happened. In 1764, the Russians came back with cannons and obliterated many of the islanders on Alaska and Umnek Island. When the Russians first came, there were about 20,000 of us on the Aleutian Islands. And by the time they went all the way up the chain, there was only about 2,000 of us left. So here's a map of Russian expansion at its greatest. So you can see they go all the way through the chain along the coastline of Alaska down to Fort Ross, which is their southernmost fort, and they'd hunt all the way down to Baja California. They would go all the way to the Krill Islands in to the west of Alaska, and they even traded with the Hawaiians. They brought a lot of Hawaiians to all these different areas as well. So, and they would just send us wherever they needed us. In about 1841, they started to pull back into Alaska, and then finally selling Alaska to the U.S. in 1867. So in 1865, there was the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed the Southern blacks. And in 1867, the U.S. bought 2 islands of captive people on St. Paul and St. George Island. And the American era had begun. So with the American era came the end of the Indian Wars in the lower 48. And with that became a different way to rid the US of the native people, and that was through assimilation in boarding schools. So this picture is a group, the five girls in front are from St. Paul Island, and they're being taken by John and Mary Tuck, who are the American Methodist missionaries on the far left side in the back. And they were being taken from St. Paul Island to Unalaska, where there was a Methodist missionary school. And from there, they were sent, some of the girls were sent 4,000 miles away to Carlisle Indian School. So in this picture, taken around 1900, there are many Alaska Natives in this picture. The person running Carlisle Indian School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, was in cahoots with Reverend Sheldon Jackson. The man in Carlisle's name was Pratt. He coined the phrase, kill the Indian to save the man. And that was the idea of assimilation through boarding schools. So they would take all these children, cut their hair, put them in uniforms, and try to educate the native out of them. 120 kids from Alaska ended up here in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. 14 of them died. One of them that died was my second great aunt, Sophia Titoff, from St. Paul Island. So this summer we went to Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and brought my great aunt Sophia back to St. Paul Island. This is her cemetery. This is a cemetery in St. Paul Island, and this is her reburial there with her family. So to back up a little bit now, we go to World War II. June 1942 was the time that the Japanese came into the Aleutian Islands. So June 3rd and 4th was the bombing of Dutch Harbor on Alaska, with the simultaneous bombing of Midway. And also during that time, the Japanese came on to Attu and Kiska Island. So in June 1942, the Japanese came to Attu and Kiska. They were there for several months before taking the 42 people that were on Attu to Otaru, where they remained for the next 3 years during the war. Half of them died. The ones that returned never returned all the way back to Attu Island, and there aren't any people there today. As you can see, in 1945, the yellow line has the people going all the way to Atka, but not all the way out to Attu Island. So these are the people being taken off St. George Island. They were taken off in a Bidar, which is the boat that you see there, and they're brought onto the boat called the Delaroff, and they're made to go down into the hold, not into the passenger cabins. So there were about 500 people being put down into, this is a fish signer, so they're put down into the fish hold. And one baby died on the way to Southeast Alaska. And this is where the people from the other Aleutian Islands were taken during World War II. The St. Paul and St. George people were brought to Funter Bay. The Atka people were brought to Kilsnu, and the other islands were brought to Wrangell Institute, where they were sent out to Burnett Inlet and to Ward Lake. They were left there until 1945. About 10% of the people that were taken off island died, and a lot more people left, either went into the military or found work other places. This is my great-grandmother. She was in Funter Bay. She survived the war. Her sister did not. So that brings us through World War II, and I think there's going to be quite a bit of discussion about the internment in a later presentation and panel. I want to let you know current projects that we're doing. So this is Fort Ross, California, which is the southernmost point of Russian expansion. And there's still a replica fort there. It's a California State Park. And in 2014, we had our first Alaska Native Day. In 2015, the Kashaya, whose land Fort Ross sits on, came and welcomed us. And that year we danced inside the fort, which was quite an accomplishment because we were never allowed historically inside the fort. And we have Alaska Native Day every other year in odd years and in May. And I hope that y'all can come out and introduce yourself, say hello to us. It's a fun day. Kagalakuk.